What a day. What a day to be here in Zimbabwe. I can still hear the people shouting and the cars honking. We began the day thinking that there were going to be impeachment proceedings. They were going to impeach him because he fell asleep in meetings. He couldn't walk without assistance because he delegated illegally responsibilities to his wife. But in the end, they didn't have to go through that. In the end, what we saw were extraordinary scenes of joy on the streets. It was the moment they thought would never come. He didn't die in office as he said he would. He was forced to resign. Forced to accept that after 37 years, Zimbabweans had had enough.
He's gone. The president of my grandfather, the president of my father, the president of myself, the president of my child is gone.
Yeah, we've been waiting for this day. Finally, it has come.
Such excitement and jubilation. I'm losing my voice trying to shout over all of these crowds. People are just coming up to me. They want to hug everybody else. They want to shake me by the hand and fist bump. One man said, the goblin has gone. Another, this is the beginning of our real independence. And another, I'm just so happy. If anybody had any doubt about what Zimbabweans feel about Robert Mugabe, well, they should be here today. Now they love the soldiers. It was the general's move against Mugabe and his hated wife Grace last week that paved the way for this. Mugabe once said only God could remove him from office. Not so. This afternoon, MPs arrived at Parliament to start proceedings to impeach the president. His own Zanu-PF party had spearheaded the move. In the middle of the session, word spread that the Speaker had received a letter from State House.
I have received, in terms of Section 96, subsection 1 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, a letter from the President, State House, Harare, Zimbabwe, 31st November 2017. The Honorable Jacob Mondenda, notice of resignation.
This was what they had prayed for. No reflection today that many now cheering not only benefited from the corruption of Mugabe's long rule, but came to office through rigged elections. That reckoning is yet to come. In downtown Harare, they'll probably party all night.
This is Zimbabwe. This is Zimbabwe. The new Zimbabwe. I never thought I would live to see this one, eh? Jehovah is God.
The future holds many problems. You can't repair a destroyed economy overnight. The man set to replace Mugabe has few democratic credentials. But for now, Zimbabweans just want to celebrate. Mugabe has gone. It's over. The new era starts here. Well, now I'm joined by Linda Masirira of the Zimbabwe Women in Politics Alliance. Linda, you were on our program on Sunday when he didn't resign. Now you're on when he did resign. How are you feeling tonight?
I'm happy. I am really, really happy, though I've got mixed feelings because I'm more of an objective person. I'm always one who looks into the future and the next day. But today is a historic moment. Going to the streets of Harare right now, the soldiers are celebrating. Zanu-PF supporters are celebrating. Opposition supporters are celebrating. Children, old people, everyone is in a joyous mood. this is a day that I crave to see for Zimbabweans, because every day I moved in the streets of Harare, in Bulawayo, in Mutare, I just saw gloomy faces. And for a change today, I saw people really happy, not pretending to be happy, but that a new dawn, a new era has come.
Zimbabweans are so optimistic, and yet they've been through so much, and the economy has been destroyed, more or less. So is it just a moment of joy, and then maybe things won't change that much?
I want to speak from an activist point of view, as a person who has studied political trends. Change doesn't come automatically. It doesn't come overnight. It's a process. It's rather unfortunate that Zimbabweans think that tomorrow they'll wake up and find money in the banks. It's not going to happen that way. It is a process. There are things that have to go on. And that is the fear that I have, that after all this euphoria, in a week's time when people are still struggling to find money, some can actually slip into a depression.
But what about actually democracy itself? Because we're expecting Emerson Mnangagwa to become president. Now, he's been with Mugabe all the time, and he doesn't exactly have much of a democratic record.
That's very right. That is my fear as well. That's why you see that I'm not as ecstatic as most Zimbabweans, because I know that it's still a long way to go for us to achieve democracy. That is why earlier on, I actually spoke to some opposition leaders, asking them to bargain for the impeachment vote with electoral reforms. At least if we have electoral reforms, we'll be secure that we'll go into free and fair and credible elections.
Do you think you will?
I'm just praying that it will happen that way. But knowing Mnangagwa, who was the right-hand man of Mugabe, who was the chief architect of all the problems that we have, I really don't see him reforming.
But what about freedom of speech? Because you had a court case, didn't you, for insulting the president. What did the magistrate say to you?
The magistrate said to me, it would be a great injustice to persecute this woman for exercising her right to freedom of expression in a democratized state. And he also said, this woman has the right to freedom of expression and is therefore acquitted.
So that is maybe a good omen.
Yes, it is. But I just hope that that is a precedent that has been set, and that also political prisoners will be released from jail, and those who are still facing court cases in the courts will have their cases thrown away, because there's precedence that has been set, that the Constitution is now being upheld.
Thank you, Linda. We have to leave it there. So much work still to do, but such an extraordinary day to be here in Harare.
I, Robert Gabriel Mugabe, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Zimbabwe and observe the laws of Zimbabwe. So help me God.
37 years ago, he was revered as the liberator of his country. But Robert Mugabe turned Zimbabwe from the breadbasket of southern Africa to an economic basket case. And to call his legacy mixed hardly does it justice.
He is seen as the father of Zimbabwe, of modern Zimbabwe. So, he had a crucial role to play. And, whatever happens, he will be acknowledged for the role he played in liberating Zimbabwe.
I will remember him as might have been, as a tragic figure, as one who could, if he had played the cards differently, have been a marvelous leader of his nation, and one who instead led it to catastrophe and penury. And that's the tragedy.
In the 70s, Mugabe was a Maoist revolutionary leading Zanu guerrillas against white minority rule. And the answer as to why it took him so long to give up power can be heard in the determination of this then freedom fighter.
The armed struggle will continue until a settlement of our own liking emerges.
In 1979, that settlement arrived with the Lancaster House Peace Agreement in London.
I feel strongly the sense of hope which goes with having achieved so much.
But amid the hope, Mugabe had proved difficult for the British to handle. Hardly surprising, given that colonial Rhodesia had jailed him for 10 years.
He was capable either of tantrums of temper or of urbane elegance, but he didn't trust us.
In 1980, the Union Jack was lowered for the last time in front of Prince Charles.
Yesterday, I fought you as an enemy. Today, you have become a friend and ally, with the same national interest, loyalty, rights and duties as myself.
But the show of unity didn't last. He fired his rival Joshua Nkomo, and war between their supporters followed. Mugabe's troops were accused of killing more than 20,000 civilians. His fear of being prosecuted for this massacre may also have extended his grip on power.
Nobody says anything about this. Britain turns a blind eye, doesn't want to know. Partly because they thought, well, you know, we've got this terrible problem of Rhodesia, Zimbabwe off our backs. We've got a solution. Our next big effort is going to be over South Africa. We need Mugabe on board on this effort, and we can't really afford to slap him about over what's an internal matter.
It was the eviction and arrest of white farmers which began Zimbabwe's steep economic decline. Some farmers had funded the opposition, and Mugabe felt betrayed. He was suspended from the Commonwealth and then withdrew Zimbabwe from it altogether. The hobnobbing with royalty had stopped, and suspicion turned to hatred.
What have the British to do with Zimbabwe? Who are you? You bloody idiots!
A year earlier, and with his people starving, rioting had broken out, though some 3 million Zimbabweans had already seen the writing on the wall and fled. Mugabe had used bulldozers against his opponents. The freedom fighter had morphed into a tyrant.
In Zimbabwe, decades of repression have forced up to 1/3 of the country to flee. Life expectancy has dropped from 60 in 1990 to 37 today.
We have governed this country better than Blair has governed his Britain.
He lost the plot, and he got so committed and determined to preserve his own power, because maybe he genuinely thinks that's in the best interest of Zimbabwe, that he was prepared to bend the rules, prepared to drive his own people to starvation.
Mugabe always arrived at the state opening of Parliament in a Rolls-Royce. Even for this hero of the liberation struggle, some old colonial habits died hard. In his last rambling appearance as president on Sunday night, Mugabe repeated his old fighting slogan, "You and I have work to do."
Let us all move forward, reminding ourselves of our wartime mantra. Iweneni tinebasa. I thank you and good night.
He sounded as if he would go on, but by now the 93-year-old president had squandered whatever revolutionary capital he had left.
Happy birthday to you.
First by grooming his wife Grace to succeed him, and secondly by sacking his deputy, Emerson Mnangagwa, on the left here, another war veteran now poised to take over. A week ago, Mugabe was placed under house arrest after making one basic mistake. By letting Mnangagwa escape and plot with generals against him, the elderly dictator had forgotten how to be brutal enough.
That report makes one understand the importance of history here. Mugabe was obsessed with it. But it's young people who are out on the streets today. If we look at the pictures, Zimbabwe is a young country. And although their parents are obsessed with the colonial past and with Rhodesia, many of them are more worried about, are they going to get jobs? The man who is likely to replace Robert Mugabe, Emerson Mnangagwa, he's from that liberation war era as well. He's 75. So the challenge is, can he really answer the needs of Zimbabweans today? Is he still going to go on, as Robert Mugabe did, about the evils of colonialism and how black Zimbabweans had suffered? All of that is true, but what Zimbabweans need now is a future. Will Emerson Mnangagwa be the person who can bring it to them? That's what people have been saying to me on the streets today. After Robert Mugabe, they say, we need a real future, a new era.
Joining us now from Birmingham, Elliot Lefebvre, an EU envoy for the opposition movement for Democratic Change Party. Mr. Lefebvre, Well, I'm not going to ask your reaction because it's bound to be one of joy and ecstasy, and we've been reporting all that this evening. What we really need to try and look at are what the implications are. In a sense, the boil has been lanced, but now there is a tremendous amount of damage from years of misrule that has to be put right. How do you see things unfolding from now?
Yes, indeed, it is an episodic and momentous occasion for all Zimbabweans. For the opposition, this has been a journey for the past 17 years. But again, the challenges will start after this euphoria is gone. And when we woke up tomorrow as politicians, especially from opposition, we are looking to see whether Emmerson Mnangagwa, who is likely to be sworn in as the incumbent president, whether he will honor his pledge that he will be an inclusive, he was calling for an inclusive government. So yes, as for Zimbabweans, I think this might be a short-lived celebration if the toxic politics still continue. And from an opposition point of view, we call upon whoever is going to be sworn in as the new leader and as the new president to reach out to all political stakeholders, especially in putting together a mechanism.
Presumably, a great deal depends on how big and how dense the circle of corrupt officials around Mugabe really was. I mean, was it just one man and a few acolytes, or was it a systemic group of people who it was very hard now to remove?
Yeah, indeed. I think the current situation in Zimbabwe will not end with the removal of Mugabe alone. This is a system, and as MDC, we have always been very clear that we've been fighting for a system. The whole institutions in Zimbabwe, for example, they are Zanu-ized. And the new roadmap to free and fair elections must also put that in consideration.
But for the moment, Mr. Favourite, you have on your side, in a sense, the ecstasy and joy of the people. How long can you keep them with you?
Yes, I think it is going to be a challenge, but it's a challenge that we politicians are prepared for as long as we work together. Yes, we need to make sure that as politicians across parties, we come together, and this is why we are calling for a mechanism, which is a transitional process, to clean the system and the institutions.
Just briefly, the army so far has behaved pretty well. Are you surprised by that?
I think all Zimbabweans are surprised with that because this is the same army that have been sustaining the Zanu-PF regime, including committing some of the acts of terror.
Right.
But yes, everybody was surprised, including us from the opposition. But we welcome the new paradigm shift by our security forces.
Mr. Favour, can you now stay with us for a moment? Because now we're joined by, in the studio, by Marshall Gore from the Zanu-PF party, the ruling party. He's the representative here in the UK. First of all, and I said the same to your opposition, that the joy and ecstasy are taken for granted because we've been illustrating it all evening. How do you feel yourself in terms of the security of the party, the security of those people who have been running things with and for Mugabe over these years?
I think it's a new dispensation for our country. We welcome and embrace the change from a party perspective. And the system has been very democratic with the Central Committee meeting and making their decisions and deliberations, which obviously has forced the president into tendering his resignation. Due process has taken place. So we are quite grateful to move on in a new political dispensation. And I'm confident that there is going to be a good leadership.
Well, I mean, talking of leadership, it's pretty clear that Mugabe down the years corrupted Zanu-PF, corrupted it. He harnessed all sorts of people to his wagon, and his wagon was a wagon of corruption, of failure economically, of abuse of power?
I don't think corrupted is the right word to use, but what I can say is that in the later years of his leadership, there were questionable decisions which he made. And I think the worst decision he's made was to try and turn the party into a dynasty and bring his wife to take over. I think those were the problems, where the ethos of the revolution were lost. And hence, obviously, we made a unilateral decision as a party using the CC to say that he must go.
But that was going on for some years, at least 2 years at least, I mean, since she really began to wield power. And there are lots of people in the party who were perfectly happy to go along with that. What happens to them?
I have to say, I don't want to be here to denigrate his leadership. But what I have to say is that we now need to unite people. People have to come together. Zimbabwe is a very peaceful country. I expect that there is going to be a lot of reconciliation, and we anticipate that our leader, Comrade Emmerson Mnangagwa, who's going to take over, will bring a nuanced approach. He'll bring people together, and hopefully, all the other people across the political divides and Zimbabweans in general will support the new dispensation.
Well, briefly, the obvious device would be free and fair elections. Do you believe in free and fair elections, and do you believe they really need to happen within perhaps a year to 18 months maximum?
Firstly, I believe in free and fair elections, but it's not up to me to decide when the elections are going to take place. Hopefully, the new leadership that is going to come will make a decision that is appropriate and right. And I have to say, as Zanu-PF, we are looking at a new dispensation where there will be consultation with key stakeholders in the country. So whatever decision is going to be made, it's going to be a very good decision for the people. The people's interest has to be put at first.
Elliot Favor, are you encouraged by hearing that? Do you believe there will be free and fair elections? And if so, when?
No, look, we are where we are today because of the Zanu-PF system, a Zanu-PF system that for the past 38 years have been using violence to win elections, have been rigging elections. And I think Zimbabweans out there are cautious about such pronunciation of statements. Again, for the next couple of days, it will be seen whether the new government will reach out to stakeholders and then put together a roadmap.
Well, on that note, Mr. Favor, we're going to have to leave it, but thank you very much indeed. We will watch carefully. Now, let's go back to Lindsay Hilsum in Zimbabwe. Lindsay, this breadbasket of Africa, which itself became an empty breadbasket, this capacity that exists in one of the really most educated populations in southern Africa, I mean, the potential for Zimbabwe is great if this great moment can be seized.
Absolutely, and that's what people are saying. Zimbabweans are incredibly optimistic. I've just been on the phone to someone in Bulawayo, the second city. They say that he said that there were people out there on the streets honking their horns and so on, just the same as here. That's a place that has a very ambivalent relationship with ex-president, I should say, Robert Mugabe, because of reasons that go back to the Liberation War. But they believe that they can make it. They can go forward now. The other thing that has happened is that the army chief, Chiwenga, he's put out a message saying that everybody should keep calm. Well, there's a meme going around saying, we're Zimbabweans, we can't keep calm. We're told by the Zanu-PF party state spokesman that former Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa, he is the anointed one, that he will be back within a couple of days. And John, it will be up to him to try and forge a new country to be able to fulfill the potential that you've just talked about, to get the economy on the road again and to make sure that this country can prosper as it should.